The third story. The flowers in Mr. Williams' garden. They grew in a 6x6 bed in the middle of Mr. Williams' front yard, ornament to an already ornamental lot. Mr. Williams' brick split level, classically shuttered, classically front porched, 75 years old, maybe, but well kept, was a pleasing sight in itself, a standout in a quaint neighborhood filled with similarly pleasing, large-yarded, brick 2 stories and split levels. Great willows and oaks grew randomly down the street, one especially large specimen fronting Mr. Williams' eastern boundary, shading and greening and giving an air of settled suburban tranquility, demiurge for wearied city workers. The flowers added to the tranquility. Clematis, or some kind of subspecies, tall and lush and thick, impenetrable. Each plant stood at least 6 feet, tightly bound and facing the world with a uniform front of giant red blooms at least 7 inches across, yellow pistils waving frantically. A breathtaking sight. They were never watered, never trimmed, never attended in any way that anyone could remember. Yet they were properly staked, or at least seemed to be, because there was some kind of artificial support among them, glimpsed when the wind moved the plants enough to show some depth. All of this spoke of attendance, but no one knew who attended. Certainly not Mr. Williams. Certainly no one in the neighborhood. So arresting a sight always attracted admirers. Cars exploring the neighborhood for the shortcut it provided between the 2 main thoroughfares that, in turn, afforded access to the Beltway, often slowed when they approached, especially in winter when all the world was dead and the drivers expected nothing but deadness. Topping the rise, they were confronted by a sea of red, beautiful flowers waving in the breeze, and you could almost hear them exclaim as the cars slapped to a halt. Flowers? In January? How'd they do that? They'd sit for a while, the tones of pleasure and surprise giving way to quiet as they stared.
No.
Then they would glance around nervously and shift in their seats and suddenly drive away. They never came back, so if there was one advantage to the flowers, they did hold down the traffic. Sometimes people would actually get out of their cars to look. The ones merely obtuse, who never took counsel of their unease, would only get as far as the curb before looking about fearfully, then hastily driving away. The arrogant actually walked up to the plot. Once, a Prius with a Go Green bumper sticker and a Virginia Tech parking decal slammed to a halt right in front, and the driver, ascetic and thinly bearded with wire glasses and an assy smile, jumped right out and over the curb, reaching for a bloom. That assy smile quickly turned to a grimace of terror, and he backpedaled, tripping over the oak's roots and crabbing all the way back to his Echo car before scrambling inside and fishtailing out. Lots of neighbors chuckled behind curtains that day. Mr. Williams didn't. Mr. Williams stood on his porch and watched, like he did every day. Propped against the far column, arms crossed, stance to the flowers, no expression on his face. There had never been an expression on his face in the memory of the neighborhood, and never a day he did not stand on the porch, from morning light to evening dark, facing the flowers. Of course, before the flowers appeared, he didn't stand there looking at them. He merely stood there looking blankly at the street as the constant sound of Mrs. Williams' harangues drifted to him from the open windows. Always open, even in winter. And Mr. Williams always on the porch, also in winter, no matter how cold. That had been his escape. With the flowers, though, there was no escape. He was not on the porch the last time someone in the neighborhood had been stupid enough to approach the flowers. That was 2 Halloweens ago, and it was Barty Clayton Jones. Barty was not his real first name, it was Calvin, but his slingshots and wild skateboarding and even wilder daredevil schemes had earned him the nickname. 17 years old and riding around with his friends, smashing pumpkins and stealing candy bags from little kids, and the Accord, driven by Kelly Summers, who had been yelling "Stop it" all night to Barty's wandering hands, came to a halt in front of the yard. "Spooky," intoned Zeke Summers, Kelly's brother, and she said "Stop it" to him because she was a nervous girl, afraid of the dark, really. "Pfft," Barty snorted. "Nothing to it. Show ya." And he leaped out and ran straight for the flowers, swinging a baseball bat. He passed through the first blooms and, according to Zeke, screamed once. Although how he heard that with Kelly screaming, "Come back, you idiot!" over and over, no one could figure. The police came and stood on the night porch with Mr. Williams, and they all stared at the plot together as they played flashlights across it, while Kelly, collapsed against her front bumper, cried, "Do something," over and over. The police weren't stupid, though, and stayed on the porch. About a week later, another carload of kids, friends of the former Barty, drove up and hurled 3 or 4 Molotovs at the bed. The plants caught and burned beautifully as the car sped away. Mr. Williams came out of the dark house and stood on the porch, lit by flames, no expression, and after a moment, went back inside. The plot roared in light and heat and hissed with boiling plant sap, and after 10 minutes or so, burned to ash. No one called the fire department. Sunrise, the flowers were all back, as tight and blooming and wonderful as before. Barty's family eventually moved away. Kelly committed suicide. It was just acting out, those Molotovs. The kids in the car knew better, but teenagers require a dramatic act to resolve their frustration. They used to throw water balloons and rocks at Mrs. Williams when she came storming out of the house, waving a cane and screeching death at them. Mr. Williams always fled around the corner of the house on those occasions, and Mrs. Williams always got the kids' bikes and slammed them against the oak, bending their frames and grinning maliciously, or beating their dogs and cats to death when they had the temerity to cross her lawn and soil her roses and lilacs and pansies so carefully planted by Mr. Williams under the watchful, hateful eye of Mrs. On occasion, she stroked him with the rake when a daylily was angled just a bit too off-center for her taste. She had been arrested many times, the police dragging her out of the house while she screamed and screamed, the blood from her self-inflicted wounds coursing over the porch and the lawn and the police car. Mr. Williams watched, no expression but ashen, because she would be back, and then, well, no one saw Mr. Williams for a week or so after she returned from her various institutions, and when they did, he looked unwell. But everyone saw Mrs. Williams every day when she was home. Every single day she stalked her yard and the sidewalk, regardless of the weather, killing squirrels or dogs, backhanding a mouthy kid, fighting the inevitable police. But the last time the ambulance dropped her off, 3 days went by and she did not appear. Neither did Mr. Williams, and that was wrong, so someone called the police, who forced the door and this time took him away. They searched the house for many hours, guys in white overalls with plastic gloves and plastic visors, and there were oversized black vans in the driveway. They found nothing, and late in the evening, they left, and Mr. Williams came back. The next morning, the flowers were there, red-bloomed and waving in the breeze, watching the street. Mr. Williams came out on the porch with a cup of coffee in his hand, froze, and stared at them without expression. Thus began his vigil. The cops came back with bulldozers and more guys in coveralls with dogs this time, and they dug up the bed, scattering the plants and piling the base in a hill next to the broken stalks and probing with poles and some kind of electronic devices. They took Mr. Williams away again. 3 days later they were done and they just left. Mr. Williams came back, going quietly into his house. The flowers came back too, the next morning, as if nothing had happened. Mr. Williams resumed his vigil. The cops didn't come back. They're not stupid. A couple of state cops did, though. Guess they read the reports and looked at each other, went, "Come on," and decided to bust this thing wide open. Be heroes. They harassed Mr. Williams on his porch for a while, getting nothing out of him but the non-expression, and then they walked over to the flowers. There were a couple of screams. The local cops came later and quietly towed their car away. You learn to live with neighborhood problems like guys who insist on changing oil on their front lawns, or kids who like to shoot BBs at your windows. You just deal. The years went by. But then Mr. Williams stopped showing up on his porch, and after 3 days there was this odor, and the cops, reluctantly, went back inside. An ambulance came, and paramedics took out a white-sheeted gurney with, obviously, Mr. Williams on it, and the local cops decided enough was enough, and they tore that house apart, taking up floorboards and taking out walls. So we heard. After 3 days they left, but not before pausing on the porch and staring at the flowers. They looked at each other and got in their cars and drove away. The next morning, there was another flower bed, 6 by 6, adjacent to the first one, filled with beautiful tall clematis, all strong and tightly bound, all blue blooms, 6 to 7 inches across, but not facing the world, facing the red ones. The house stands empty, and you just deal. The end.